Revenge with Karen. I knew something was off when I watched a mid-level manager cry in the bathroom over a broken training link. It wasn't the tears that stopped me. God knows, I've seen worse in 6 years of corporate compliance. It was the look she gave me when I asked if she'd submitted the 4B form for her onboarding audit. She blinked at me like I'd asked if she'd baptized her router. That's when it hit me. No one knows how this place runs. They think systems just exist. Dashboards just light up green. That compliance is a toggle you flip, not a war you quietly win 1,000 times a day in forms, timestamps, approvals, and legally binding language no one bothers to read until something bursts into flames. Hi, I'm Emily. Or I was Emily, depending on how far you are into this disaster. For 6 years, I lived in the guts of a company that believed paperwork was the enemy of progress. I designed systems to make sure we could pay people legally, hire without lawsuits, renew vendors without breaching contracts, and file reports that didn't trigger a federal review. In other words, I was the duct tape holding this ship together. The quiet kind, the dependable kind, the kind you don't notice until you trip over it and eat regulatory pavement. If this already sounds like your work life or someone you know, do me a solid. Subscribe and hit that like button. It helps more than you know, and it's the only kind of compliance I don't charge for. Now back to the story. Jared slithered in 3 months ago, oozing nepotism and Axe body spray. CEO's brother-in-law, which apparently qualified him for a brand new operational efficiency role, even though his last job was running a vape shop that went under because he forgot to pay sales tax. I wish I were kidding. His onboarding was a parade of arrogance. Why do we have 2 trainings on harassment? He whined during his orientation. Can't we just write "don't be a dick" on the wall and call it a day? By week 2, he'd started what he called a streamline initiative, which translated to, let's delete everything I don't understand. Compliance was first on the chopping block, naturally. Non-revenue departments drain morale, he announced at the quarterly town hall, smiling like a man who'd just discovered LinkedIn buzzwords and thought they were spells. I let it slide. I always did. When people underestimated me, I cataloged it like inventory. One day it would matter. The moment that inventory came due was a Tuesday. I just finished updating the annual vendor renewal grid and was heading to refill my coffee when I passed the glass conference room. Jared was in there, feet up on the table, joking with a couple of junior execs who still thought he was edgy for calling HR the fun police. Then I heard it, not whispered, not subtle, loud enough that I paused mid-step. She builds these training modules like they're the 10 Commandments, Jared laughed. It's just busy work. Compliance isn't a real job, it's where careers go to die. Laughter, like hyenas on a carcass made of ignored risk assessments. I didn't flinch, not even inside, just kept walking. You don't win by reacting, you win by documenting. That night, I pulled up the backbone of the certification flow. My name was on every node, every sign-off, every redirect. My authority wasn't just implied, it was hard-coded. If someone wanted to remove me from the system, they'd have to do more than make a snide comment in a meeting. They'd have to understand the architecture I'd spent years building. And Jared couldn't spell infrastructure without autocorrect. Still, the air was shifting. I started noticing subtle things. My access to certain budget folders was suddenly pending. My request for additional training credits was under review. I was pulled from the invite list for the Q4 strategic planning session, which I'd led for the past 3 years. The slow death of relevance. Death by passive-aggressive calendar edits. And then came the email. Subject line departmental realignment, effective immediately. It was a masterpiece of euphemistic HR drivel. Compliance would now be folded under operations for strategic synergy. My team would be redistributed. My role was under evaluation. Jared signed it, not even the CEO. Jared, I didn't reply. I didn't schedule a meeting. I printed it, put it in a folder, and waited. Because when a man calls the structure holding up the building busy work, you don't scream. You just let the building fall. They fired me on a Thursday. Not in an office, not in a meeting, on a Zoom call. Full leadership team, cameras on, microphones hot, and Jared grinning like a toddler with a box of matches, ready to burn down what he didn't understand. I'd logged in early, as usual. Adjusted the lighting, double-checked my notes, even had my quarterly compliance update slide deck queued, color-coded, and approved. I'd done this a dozen times before. These calls were boring, predictable. The kind of thing people muted so they could reply to emails or text their dog walker. But not today. Today, the air was off. The meeting invite had been labeled Q3 Strategic Realignment. That already smelled like HR was cooking something rotten. Still, I showed up. I always showed up. Quiet, on time, prepared. Jared came in late with that frat boy energy that makes you want to Lysol your screen. He gave the usual greetings, did a few awkward jokes about Zoom fatigue, then said, "Let's dive right in." The slide deck he shared had no intro, just a title, Restructuring for Efficiency. First bullet point, compliance functions will be decentralized. Second bullet point, training development to be outsourced Q4. Third, compliance manager role dissolved. And that was it. My entire department, years of systems, workflows, vendor training maps, audit prep flows reduced to 3 bullet points and a smirk. Then came the quote that would live in my head for a long, long time. "Those training expenses are over," Jared said, like he was announcing the end of the Goddamn War. "And so are you," he laughed, on a call with 47 people, department heads, legal, HR. The CEO's box in the corner, dark and silent, marked out medical leave. I didn't say a word, not even a blink. I muted myself, took off my headset, stood up, and without breaking eye contact with my camera, set my badge down on the table beside me, right next to my work phone and the tiny brass key that unlocked the cabinet where we kept the compliance binder. It wasn't symbolic. It was surgical. I left the call while Jared was still mid-joke about cutting the fat. Downstairs, I passed Carol from payroll. She gave me a look, confused, maybe worried, but didn't say anything. No one ever knew what to say when the competent ones got axed. We don't make scenes. We don't cry in the break room. We just vanish, like the systems we build. I got to my car, sat down, and let the silence settle. No music, no AC, just the hum of my dashboard and the faint taste of copper behind my teeth. Rage, maybe, but something colder too, something old. They didn't even give me an exit interview. They didn't ask for a transition plan, or system access logs, or the cheat sheet I kept for navigating the vendor compliance flow, the one with the color-coded flags for each federal certification tier. You know, the one legal liked to borrow whenever they had to look smart in front of a partner. Nope, they just sliced the artery and expected the body to keep walking. I didn't scream. I didn't email HR. I didn't even call my team to warn them. I went home, brewed tea, opened my laptop, and filled out one form. Clause 8.7, Certification Authority Termination Notice. It's not a flashy form. Not even one most people know exists. It was part of the internal compliance overhaul I'd written 3 years earlier after a vendor audit exposed how badly we documented role-based certification controls. I'd added the clause as a safeguard, a final gate, a tripwire. When the person responsible for compliance is terminated, they must revoke their signature authority. Manually, the system doesn't assume, it waits, like a dog on a leash, loyal, still, and potentially lethal. I submitted it, signed it, sent it directly to legal. Then I closed my laptop, made a grilled cheese, and turned my phone off. You don't interrupt someone who's decided to burn the foundation, not when they poured the concrete themselves. Clause 8.7 wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a bomb or a screaming match or some fiery final speech that gets you slow clapped out of a building. It was a 6-line form, Arial 10-point. No bold, no italics. One digital checkbox beside "I hereby withdraw all active certification authority," effective immediately. It had taken me years to earn that authority. 15 vendor certifications, 3 federal audit cycles, and exactly one policy loophole buried in a paragraph no one had read since onboarding. It took me 12 seconds to revoke it. I emailed the form to legal at 6:43 p.m. The only one still on was a junior assistant named Monica, who once asked me if SOX was a new HR dress code. She opened the PDF, stared at it, and flagged it for review without replying. Which was fair. Most people only ever hear the word clause when someone's suing someone or there's eggnog involved. Meanwhile, Jared was still high from his little public execution. Word traveled fast, especially when someone got axed on a Zoom call like a reality show contestant. People love blood so long as it isn't theirs. Back in HR, Jared apparently marched down to Janice's desk. She's been there since fax machines were cutting edge, and declared purge her access. Full deactivation. Today. He said it like he was banishing me from the kingdom. Like access to the shared Google Drive was the sword in the stone. Janice didn't question him. She never does. Just clicked her little macros and smiled politely. My badge, void, work email, redirected, payroll status, terminated. Jared walked back to his glass office, flopped into his chair, and according to someone who messaged me later, proceeded to eat half a rotisserie chicken with his bare hands while watching YouTube tutorials on managing digital teams. And that should have been the end of it. Except, about 11 minutes later, the first red light blinked. It was subtle at first. The vendor cert dashboard reported a validation loop failure. Harmless enough. It happens sometimes when someone updates their name in the system and forgets to re-sign a conflict of interest disclosure. But then came the second light, employee training tracker, no valid certifier. And then the third, payroll compliance engine, flagged with a level 3 alert, certifying officer signature revoked. Now, these systems don't shout. They don't scream. They're polite, they just stop. The dashboards at the department heads' terminals started flickering amber and red. Contract renewals hung in digital limbo. Automated emails paused. New employee onboarding forms stalled at pending training completion, unable to progress. And the compliance bots, those cheerful little scripts I'd written that double-checked everything from harassment training to payroll tax integrity, went dormant. Silently. Obediently. Been waiting for one signal, my signature. And now they had its inverse. I was gone. Authority null. The system didn't panic, it obeyed. By morning, finance couldn't run their approval queues. Payroll couldn't verify its disbursement certifications. Vendor access portals showed error messages. Nothing catastrophic yet. Just a quiet freezing of the blood in the company's body, a hiccup in the rhythm, a pause with claws. Jared, of course, noticed none of it. Someone told me he was seen in the cafeteria that morning gloating to the marketing team about cutting the bloat. He actually said, "We're leaner already. Watch how fast this place moves now that the policy brigade's out of the way." He said that, while an entire company slowly ground into procedural molasses. Because here's the thing about bureaucratic triggers. They don't make noise. They're not dramatic. They don't explode. They hum. And when the wrong person pulls the wrong thread, entire tapestry doesn't rip, it tightens. Until you can't breathe, until no one can, and the best part, Jared still thought he'd won, thought he'd silenced me, thought deleting a badge would undo 6 years of embedded logic and legal scaffolding. He didn't understand that my absence wasn't absence, it was subtraction. The kind that comes with consequences, but not yet. Let the storm gather. By Friday, the cracks were starting to show, but they didn't look like cracks yet. They looked like glitches, hiccups. Maybe IT just needs to refresh the server. The corporate version of did you try turning it off and on again? Except this time, the problem wasn't the machine. It was who wasn't inside it anymore. It started small. HR tried onboarding 2 new hires, one in procurement, one in sales. Basic stuff. Upload I-9s, run background checks, send out the standard harassment and ethics training modules before they could be officially activated in the system. Simple, routine. Accept the links to the compliance modules through 403 errors. Blocked. Then the HR assistant tried to override the training requirement manually, just for onboarding, just to keep it moving, and was met with a pop-up she'd never seen before. Error. No active certifying officer on record. Proceeding would violate Internal Control Protocol 3.1.1b. She screenshotted it, sent it to IT, who promptly shrugged. They rebooted the server. Nothing, checked firewall logs, nothing. The problem wasn't technical. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. That same morning, a major vendor sent over a contract renewal draft. Standard 2-year update, nothing fancy. When legal opened the contract management system to cross-check certifications, as is required for risk rating, they found red banners across the vendor's record. Client certification chain expired. The internal audit log showed it clearly. Certification status invalid. Last validator, Emily Grant. No override permitted. They tried to push it through anyway. The system refused. Hard-coded block. And then payroll tried to run the biweekly draft report. How payroll doesn't ask for much. Just a green light that says, yes, all employees on this list are compliant with current training, status, and certification. That green light unlocks the final approval and distributes pay stubs and direct deposits like a sleepy, benevolent god. Except this time, there was no green light. Just a yellow warning, certification signature invalidated. The entire run queued up, but the Disperse Funds button was grayed out. Available, they thought it was a bug. IT swarmed in. By 11 o'clock a.m., 3 teams were involved: HR, IT, and payroll, and none of them had answers. Jared was summoned like some bloated Caesar, fresh from yelling at marketing about rebranding the quarterly report. He marched into the operations pit, waved his hand, and declared, "This is an IT problem. Get them to reboot the whole compliance engine or whatever. We've got people waiting." The IT lead, a wiry guy named Mike who'd once told me he considered me the only reason legal isn't buried in lawsuits, tried to explain that this wasn't a glitch. Jared interrupted. "Then just assign someone else as the certifier. Hell, put your own name on it. We need this fixed." Mike didn't respond, just opened the certification backend and tilted the screen toward him. There it was, every compliance flow, every module, every approval chain. One common denominator: final validator e-grant not editable. Locked, hard-coded. Jared blinked. "Why can't we just change it?" Mike scrolled down, highlighted a footnote. It read, "Certifier may only be reassigned via living authority transfer from current validator or board vote under emergency protocol." The living authority part hit Jared like a fly he couldn't swat. "So call her and get her to transfer it." Mike shook his head. "Access is already purged. Per your directive." A pause. The kind that makes everyone around you pretend to be busy with spreadsheets that aren't open. Jared exhaled loudly, puffing his cheeks like a toddler denied dessert. "Okay, so legal can override it, right?" Mike stared. Legal had already tried. Twice. The system logged both attempts as unauthorized changes to a compliance-critical role, and according to the backend audit trail, it filed an internal compliance alert directly to the general counsel's mailbox. That's when the first whispers started. People from finance messaging folks in HR. "Hey, do you know what's going on with training certs?" Ops asking IT, "Is there a reason we can't access the procurement templates?" Even the junior project managers were pinging each other, wondering why the internal ticketing bot had gone offline. Because here's the thing no one ever remembers about systems like these. They don't scream when they break, they stall. And when you've removed the one person who knew the override codes, who built the gates everyone walks through without noticing, suddenly no one's moving. Jared thought he could cut the head off the snake and still get it to slither. But Emily wasn't the head. She was the door, and it just slammed shut. By Monday, legal had stopped pretending they weren't panicking. Began with a calendar hold. Urgent compliance review 9 a.m. Confroom B. No subject line, no agenda, just an unspoken understanding that whatever this was, it wasn't going to be solved with coffee and optimism. At 8:56, Monica from legal, the same assistant who'd quietly flagged my Clause 8.7 form, walked into the room holding a printed copy like it was radioactive. She didn't sit, just hovered near the whiteboard, clutching the document and scanning faces like she wasn't sure who was about to get fired and who was going to scream first. Jared swaggered in last, late by 7 minutes, holding a Starbucks cup and wearing that hollow grin reserved for middle managers who think their LinkedIn profile is a strategy. He dropped into a chair, spun it slightly, and said, "All right, who broke what now?" Monica cleared her throat and passed the form to the general counsel. He read it again. Then he did something that hadn't happened all year. He took off his glasses. "Clause 8.7 has been invoked," he said slowly, like someone translating ancient scripture. Jared blinked. "And that means what exactly?" "It means," the GC continued, "that all internal certifications tied to the certifying officer known as Emily Grant are now legally null." "Okay," Jared said, waving one hand dismissively. "We assign a new certifying officer." "Who's next in line?" "No one." Silence. "I'm sorry, what?" Jared leaned forward. "There's always someone next in line. That's like Business 101. The GC looked at him the way you look at someone who just asked if they could microwave tinfoil. Clause 8.7 was authored by Emily 3 years ago as part of the updated internal control charter. It was board approved during the Q1 compliance overhaul, when you called a paperwork circle jerk and didn't attend. A few people coughed. Someone pretended to check their phone. The GC continued. Per 8.7, the company's certification framework was transitioned to a living signatory model, meaning every automated certification chain is validated by a single, legally empowered authority, Emily. The redundancy protocols, meaning the right to appoint or name a successor, were also tied to her sign-off. Transfer? "Okay, but she's not dead," Jared said, looking around for someone to agree with him. "No," the GC said, "but she's gone, and her authority went with her. There's no successor." Jared scoffed. That's insane. There has to be a backup. It's policy. She wrote the policy. The GC snapped. That landed. For the first time in the meeting, Jared's mouth actually closed. His hand gripped the coffee cup tighter. Let's loop in the board, he said. They can vote in a new certifier. Only under emergency protocol, said Monica, reading from the policy binder. An emergency is defined as certifier incapacitation or death. Not we screwed up and fired her without understanding what she controlled. That's absurd, Jared muttered. You're telling me one employee, just one, has the ability to freeze this entire company? No, the GC replied, you did. When you removed her. He slid a page across the table. Highlighted text. Everyone leaned in. Authority transfer requires active digital and notarized approval from current certifying officer. There was a second clause beneath it. In the event of unplanned termination, authority is revoked immediately unless successor is pre-designated. Failure to maintain an active certifier renders systems non-compliant under audit standards 2.3.7 and 4.9. So, what? You're saying we're non-compliant? That's what the system is already flagging. At the head of IT, who'd been sitting quietly until now. Our internal dashboards are lit up like a Christmas tree. We've got pending audits, frozen training modules, and vendor renewals stuck because no one can sign off. Jared shifted in his seat, sweat starting to form at his temples. Just call her, he muttered. Offer her a contract. Bring her back. The GC closed the binder. She's not responding. And even if she was, she's not under obligation. She left in good standing. There's no clause forcing her to transfer anything. Someone from HR whispered she didn't even take her plants. The whole room stared at Jared. He opened his mouth, then shut it. Because for the first time since he got his vanity job, the reality settled in. He couldn't fix this with charm or delegation or that stupid PowerPoint template labeled efficiency wins. He was in over his head. The woman he'd humiliated in front of the company had quietly set the stage for a fallout no one could stop. He didn't just fire the compliance officer. He removed the keystone from the arch, and now everything above him was starting to shift. At exactly 4:45 p.m. on Thursday, the system died. Not in the usual flailing IT ticket, reboot and hope for the best kind of way. No, this was precise, surgical, engineered. It began with payroll. Disbursement queue, a fat little progress bar that usually chugged along with cheerful predictability, froze mid-process. Not a crash, not a lag, just a halt, like the system had looked at the request and said, absolutely not. Within 30 seconds, alerts went out across 6 departments. Disbursement authorization blocked. Certifying officer invalid. By 4:47, vendor access was next. Procurement tried to log into the vCert portal to confirm delivery schedules. All access denied. No credential error. No firewall issue. Just a clean, cold system-level message. Client trust validation failed. Vendors who had been on auto-renew now saw every invoice bounce back with a soft denial stamp. Contract compliance unverified. Please resubmit with active officer reference. By 4:52, IT confirmed what everyone feared. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't some cascading failure. This was the system doing exactly what it had been programmed to do. And the final gut punch came at 5:01 p.m., when a federal compliance auto-report triggered. Every quarter, the company submitted a status packet to their regulating body, a dense, unreadable PDF stuffed with training logs, vendor vetting timelines, payroll certification flows, and about 14 digital signatures. It was usually auto-signed by the system based on my role as certifying officer. But now it submitted blank, no sign-off, no validator, just a blinking field where my name used to be. Seconds later, a follow-up alert hit the internal audit queue. Status, revoked. Attached was the timestamp of my Clause 8.7 trigger, now filed as an internal legal event. It was like watching a phantom reach up from the paperwork and slap the entire leadership team across the face. Jared was in the middle of berating a systems engineer when the junior board member stormed into the meeting room. Why did no one flag this? She snapped. Heads turned. Flag what? Jared said, trying to maintain some scrap of authority, even as his voice cracked. She held up her iPad. Clause 8.7. It was filed 6 days ago. It's been sitting in legal's back end. It's tied to every single cert dependency in our infrastructure. I thought IT could override it, Jared said weakly. The junior board member didn't laugh. She just looked at him like he'd tried to explain gravity with sock puppets. This isn't an IT glitch, Jared. This is legal architecture. This is infrastructure. You fired the person whose existence validated this company's compliance. There is no override. There is no shortcut. Silence. Then, ping the founder's assistant messaged legal. He wants a call, now, not asks, wants. They'd kept him out of it as long as they could. He'd been recovering from surgery, some post-op thing gone sideways, and everyone agreed it was best not to stress him out. But you can only dodge a mushroom cloud for so long. They patched him in by 5:17. The founder's voice came through like gravel soaked in whiskey. I need someone to explain, he said slowly. Our certifier's name is missing from a federal report. No one answered. Jared, white as drywall, cleared his throat. There was a transition. The compliance role, the founder cut him off. Who signed off on that transition? No answer. Who flagged the dependencies? Still nothing. Who reviewed the cascade effects on our operational systems? It was the GC who finally spoke. Quiet, grim, we didn't. Because we didn't understand what she'd built. A long pause. Could hear the founder breathing, short, strained, like every syllable he was about to say had to crawl past a surgical scar. Let me be clear, he said. You fired the person who built our compliance structure, didn't name a successor, didn't consult the board, and didn't know the systems would lock without her. Jared tried to jump in. It was a misunderstanding, no, the founder rasped. It was negligence. Yours. The line went dead. But the panic didn't, because the fallout had just begun. Finance couldn't release salaries. HR couldn't onboard. Legal couldn't certify contracts. And a regulatory body had just received an unsigned compliance packet with our company's name stamped on every empty page. Somewhere, buried in the logs, my name still lingered, like a ghost, not screaming, not gloating, just watching as the scaffolding I built, quietly, meticulously, invisibly, collapsed on the people who thought they could delete me. But it wasn't me they erased. It was the lock. And now they were stuck outside. The call was set for 7:30 a.m. sharp. No one slept the night before, not HR, not finance, not legal, and certainly not Jared, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 hours. He'd stopped shaving. His tie was crooked. His voice, usually cocky and nasal, had hollowed into something brittle and twitchy. Founder's face appeared on the screen first. Still in a hospital bed, Roman IV taped to his hand, wires peeking out beneath his gown. The assistant had angled the laptop on a breakfast tray, the beige wall behind him blank except for a wall clock ticking audibly. He didn't say hello. He didn't smile. He just looked into the camera and said, "Someone walk me through the sequence." From the beginning. The general counsel cleared his throat. Looked like he'd been crying in the elevator earlier. Last Thursday, Emily Grant submitted a Clause 8.7 withdrawal notice. Her certification authority was immediately revoked. The founder nodded once. What did that affect? Everything, the GC said simply. Payroll, vendor contracts, training compliance, employee onboarding, even federal audit verification. Every system we run depends on a living certifier for legal and procedural validation. Founder didn't blink. And who fired her? All eyes turned to Jared. He opened his mouth, then stopped, then tried again. She was part of a broader restructure. Non-revenue roles were being, the founder raised a hand. No one asked for your defense. Just tell me, did you terminate Emily Grant? Yes, Jared muttered. Did you identify a successor certifier? No. Did you review the internal dependencies before executing that termination? Jared swallowed. I didn't realize there were dependencies. I assumed IT, the founder turned to legal. Why didn't anyone flag this earlier? The GC's voice was flat. The form was filed properly. But the impact wasn't understood until the systems began failing. A moment passed. Then the founder leaned slightly forward, his voice quieter. Who tied payroll to her certifications? That's when Monica from legal, still hovering near the edge of the frame, spoke up. Barely a whisper. She did. 3 years ago. The founder's eyes narrowed. Was that approved? Yes, by the board, as part of the 2020 compliance overhaul. She transitioned us to a certifier-dependent model to close audit loopholes. There was silence on the call, not the awkward kind. The kind that changes careers. Then Jared's voice cut in, sharp with desperation. Why wasn't I told about this? The founder looked directly into the camera, because you never asked. He let that hang there, let it rot in the center of the screen like a corpse at a dinner party. You walked into a system you didn't understand and ripped out its anchor, because you thought it wasn't doing anything. I thought she was redundant, Jared said quietly. No, the founder replied. She was invisible because she designed it that way. Someone muted themselves to cry. You could hear the click. The founder leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. He looked tired, beyond tired. He'd aged out of the fight and into something colder. He looked to legal again. What are our options? None that are fast, the GC admitted. We could try to re-engineer the certification pathways, but it would require board votes, vendor renegotiations, and can we rehire her? No one answered. They tried. Everyone knew they'd tried. Reached out through HR, through private recruiters, even through old friends on LinkedIn. Silence. No returned calls. No read receipts. Just one quiet voicemail that had reportedly ended with a sigh and the sound of a train in the background. She's gone, the GC said. Jared looked like he might actually cry. Not out of guilt, he didn't have the moral bandwidth for that, but out of the realization that his little empire, his linked-in fairy tale of streamlining, was about to be footnoted as the moment a $130 million company publicly faceplanted into a federal compliance crater. The founder's hands clenched into fists. "This company trusted you," he said softly. No one breathed. "We gave you a seat. We gave you rope." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Because rope does one of two things. You use it to lift others up, or you hang yourself with it. The only person who ever understood the weight of it, Emily, was gone. The apology letter was 2 pages long and utterly worthless. It had been drafted by committee, revised 5 times by PR, and run through legal like a corpse through a meat grinder. Polite, measured, hollow. "We regret the oversight," it began, like someone had forgotten to water a plant and not detonated the core of an entire company. They sent it to Emily's last known personal email. No reply. Mailed a physical copy to an old P.O. box listed in her HR file. It came back stamped, returned to sender. No forwarding address. They tried calling. The number rang until voicemail. Her name wasn't even on the greeting anymore, just a generic recording. "This number is not accepting messages at this time." Jared, to his credit, did try to call her once himself. He got halfway through the voicemail, stammering something about reconsidering opportunities. The line beeped and cut him off. She never called back. Recruiters were dispatched, high-level ones. Compliance whisperers, ex-auditors, system architects. Anyone who could speak fluent certification and unravel the barbed wire she'd left behind. It was unanimous. No one qualified, not in time, not for what she'd built. Emily hadn't just managed a system. She'd been the system. She'd threaded her authority into the very fabric of the company like surgical stitching. Seamless, invisible, essential. Every function that relied on automated validation, frozen. Every department that needed training clearances, contract sign-offs, legal confirmation, paralyzed. And the longer the paralysis continued, the worse it got. Vendors pulled out of renewals. Contractors demanded manual confirmations that legal couldn't issue. HR had a dozen new hires stuck in onboarding limbo, unable to legally begin until their compliance logs were validated by someone who no longer existed in the system. Then came the board meeting. It was supposed to be closed door. It wasn't. Someone leaked it. Probably an assistant who had their benefits frozen mid-cycle and decided chaos tasted better than loyalty. The transcript landed in a Slack thread and burned through the company like wildfire. Junior board member suggested what no one wanted to say out loud. Should we self-report to the regulator? Silence. Not because it was a bad idea, but because it was a necessary one. The founder, patched back into the call from his hospital room, didn't argue. His face was pale, skin hanging from his cheeks like old paper. The stress event, likely triggered by Jared's collapse of everything, had nearly killed him. Now, the company he built was hanging by a thread. The only person who could have sewn it back together was gone. "Prepare the report," he said, voice like gravel. "Better they hear it from us than find it on their own." The fallout was instant. News started circulating in private equity groups. Whispers about a mid-size firm with a frozen payroll, a non-compliant federal report, and a certifier gone rogue. The founder collapsed again that night, admitted for observation. No visitors. By the next morning, Jared was invited into a meeting labeled HR Transition Planning. He left 30 minutes later without his badge, his title, or the little nameplate he used to tap smugly on Zoom calls. He didn't fight it. He just walked out. No speech. No denial. He knew, everyone knew, the office changed after that. Not loudly, not overnight. But silence replaced arrogance. People whispered in the halls. Slack channels slowed down. Eye contact became rare. No more streamlined jokes. No more empty confidence. Just quiet. No one knew if Emily was watching or if she even cared, but her absence had become a presence of its own. A phantom in the workflows, a ghost in the signatures, and no one dared touch the systems anymore, not because they didn't need fixing, but because now they understood what happened when you underestimated the person who built them. The train hummed beneath her like a living thing, the kind of low, steady rhythm that lulls thoughts into long corridors of silence. Emily sat by the window, hands wrapped around a paper cup of black tea still too hot to drink, watching farmland and fog slip past in ghost-gray blurs. She hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days, not since she left, not since she closed her laptop, filed one final form, and walked out of a job that thought it could amputate her without bleeding out. Her phone buzzed in her bag. Again, it had been buzzing on and off for hours. Voicemails, texts, Slack notifications desperately routed through personal channels, and a few vague email subject lines from old coworkers like just checking in and quick favor. If you have a second, she didn't check any of them. She knew what they were. There's a tone people use when they realize they pushed too far. It's not quite apology, not quite desperation. It's the sound of a drowning man calling for the lifeguard he mocked 5 minutes ago. The train rounded a bend, sunlight cutting through the window, warming the side of her face. She closed her eyes, took a careful sip of tea, and exhaled. She didn't feel victorious, not in the chest-thumping, hair-flipping way revenge fantasies always promise. No fireworks, no orchestral climax, just stillness. Like someone finally set down a weight she didn't realize she'd been carrying. Fingers reached into the bag, not for her phone, but for the small leather notebook she always kept close. Inside were handwritten notes, ideas she'd had for years about building a new kind of compliance platform. One that wasn't just reactive, one that wasn't built to be dismissed until the fire started. The notebook had no company logo, no initials, just ink and structure and the kind of stubborn foresight that people only recognize in hindsight. Another buzz. She almost ignored it. Almost. But the notification preview glowed through the fabric. Board ratifies structural compliance overhaul, doc ref. Grant DOC a framework v3, she read it once. Then again. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, a smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. They hadn't just used her work. They had ratified it, her structure, her documentation, thing they thought they could live without until it unstitched them like a seam in a sinking boat. They'd embedded it into the bones of the company. Permanent now, official, untouchable. The irony wasn't lost on her. They had deleted her and ended up making her architecture immortal. She didn't forward the message, didn't screen cap it, didn't even reply to the board assistant who'd probably sent it with a shaking hand and a silent prayer. She just tapped her screen dark again, slid the phone back into her bag, and looked out at the passing fields. No speech, no revenge, just the knowledge that when it all mattered, really mattered, they hadn't reached for Jared, or IT, or legal, or the founder in his hospital bed. They reached for her, through her notes, her policies, her structure. And she wasn't there to save them, because she didn't have to be. The train rolled on, past towns that didn't know her name, toward a future she didn't have to share with anyone who once called her redundant. She sipped her tea and disappeared. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.